I was a young preteen or early teens, I just had this thought that it would be something I wanted to do. Why, I couldn't tell you, because I don't think I had any concept of what being an attorney was. The best clue I had was from reading To Kill a Mockingbird. And I really think that the character in that book I emulated the most was Scout, who obviously was a child and not an attorney. But I think I thought if I was going to be Scout as a youth, when I grew up, I wanted to have, the living situation or whatever, kind of the exposure to things that she had had as a youth. And that, I think, caused me to think that there would be something wonderful about being an attorney. For me, it was kind of just a realization of another step that you'd worked for and been able to do. So it's obviously very exciting, and it's like, okay, well, I get to do this. And then at the same time, it was really scary, because by being on campus at Washburn, I'd met several law students. I knew it was not going to be an easy thing to do. And so you always have that buyer's remorse. It's like, oh, is this really what I want to do? So I had people who laughed at me thinking that I would be an attorney. My paternal grandmother, I remember very clearly when I told her that that's what I wanted to do, she just sat and just held her belly and giggled and laughed and laughed. The prospect of a girl being an attorney to her was just that funny. And I think the fact that it was somebody in her family that wanted to be one was equally as hilarious to her. She just couldn't conceive that that was something that would happen or could be done. And I think a lot of people in my family really questioned if I was biting off more than I would want to do or should be doing. Because again, I don't think any of them had a concept of what it was or what I was getting into, and so that was kind of scary to them, I think, and they would have been much more comfortable, I think, if I'd chosen a more traditional path that they would have understood and realized what was, ahead. Well, you feel like you're being immersed in a foreign language, and that was a lot of it. You take the class of torts, and I'm thinking, if I don't even know what the class title means for sure, what am I doing here, and so that it is overwhelming. The class sizes are very different than what you'd had. My experience had been in undergrad, so that's scary. There are just the knowledge. Like I said, by being on campus, I had a sense of this was my last day of not being totally overwhelmed with reading and that type of thing. So there was a lot of trepidation. I kind of had a unique start to law school in that, because I had heard all of these stories about law school for the first time in my, really since I was like 12 years old, I decided that I probably shouldn't work. So I started law school just being a student. And about 2 weeks into law school, I thought, I can't handle this. I don't know what to do. And so I began to apply for a law clerk position and started working, several hours a week in that position. And so I probably, again, I have no regrets, because I just was used to that kind of that structure and what that brought. Plus, being in a law firm just gave me so much practical knowledge. I mean, I started as a runner for the law firm, which meant you basically took the pleadings to the courthouse and filed them, and took stuff to other attorneys' office for signatures or just those sorts of things. But it gave a concrete example for me as I was going through some of the classes, and they would talk about this kind of a pleading or that kind of a pleading. It was like, well, at least I held that in my hand, and you just kind of pick up little things and little knowledge. So from day one, I love reading about the law. It's never been a chore for me. It's very, very easy for me to get lost in doing that, and I have to force myself sometimes to put it down. So that aspect of law school was easy and fun for me. So I guess I should have said that really, when you think back, the worst part of law school were finals. I still remember how drained I would be at the end of a 4-hour final, where you had just written nonstop without any break. This was before computers, before we had anything like that, so you were, definitely had the calluses and stuff from writing and all of that fun stuff. So I think law school is a little different than almost any other graduation. Well, there obviously are other professionals that face the same thing, but you're turning right around to take the bar. And so it's like, okay, a day to breathe, but that's about it. And so, and for me, I think law school graduation also kind of got lost in the busyness of, we had a wedding ceremony 1 week later. We graduated on one weekend, got married on the next weekend. And so I think I was looking ahead to that bigger, more, at that point, more important celebration than finishing law school. So when I graduated, our experience was very different than what I think people face today. For those of us that were in the top part of the class and on Law Journal, really most of us had jobs in the fall semester of our third year. And those that kind of crept past that Christmas break without a job were the ones I think that were more stressed about not having a job. So my situation was that I did have a job by mid-semester of the fall, and it turned out that I was accepting a position with the Topeka firm, and because of that, I then had the opportunity to start work for them right away. So I began working for them in a law clerk position this second semester of my final year of law school. I mentioned that my first bout with discrimination was in my job interview process, and I kind of skipped over that. But that is when I realized that the world of law was not going to be the same as it had been in law school in terms of the treatment by the professors and the acceptance that you had there. I was not alone in that. There were other people and other women in my class who also ran into just blatantly discriminatory comments being made. People didn't even attempt to hide it at times. We had one situation with an on-campus interview, and then in another situation where I, after the on-campus interview, was invited to the firm for follow-up interviews, and felt very welcomed by many members of the firm, but then as you met each individual ones, there were several who began to ask totally illegal questions about your plans for having children and how you were, how long was it I was going to work before I quit to stay with my babies, and those sorts of questions that made you realize that there were people who still didn't believe that women were serious about the practice of law, for one thing, that we were just kind of doing it until we found the rich husband to, take care of us, or the people who just resented us being in the profession and, again, taking the jobs from the men who were trying to feed a family. I also ran into, in that situation, I began to run into other people in the community who kind of had the same attitude, including women, who really thought I had just gone to law school because it was a good place to meet men, or who thought it was just something to do until, I decided to stay home or have a family and do those sorts of things, and who just, even women my own age who didn't conceive of a woman being a full-time professional. The type of practice I ended up working in mostly, I had several clients who I worked with on a long-term basis. And those people became friends as well. You know, in a kind of a different sort of way than a social friend, but they were people you knew about their families, you had those connections and that kind of thing. But so there was that personal connection, but there was also this sense that you were really helping people with a situation in their lives, or in their business, whatever their circumstance was, and you were helping them find ways to deal with the situation, and whether that be advanced planning to keep them out of a legal situation, or whether it was dealing with something that had not gone so well, and they were trying to deal with the aftermath. And there were also, my firm was very good, and they considered it an essential part of being a professional, to be involved in the community, to be involved in the bar, and to do pro bono work. And so that was just a given that you would do those sorts of things. And I found all of those things to be very rewarding, very satisfying, in ways that allowed me to grow in leadership capacities. And but volunteer work has always been rewarding to me, and the pro bono as well. And I really think some of the, as I reflect back on my private practice, some of the cases that I enjoyed doing were the pro bono cases that I did do. And some of that, I think, was because you felt like those were people that may not have had help if you hadn't been able to do it. It wasn't like they had a lot of other options. So. I had not given any serious consideration to being a trial court judge, but at one point several people approached me and said that they felt like it was important that Shawnee County, Topeka have a woman on the bench. And at that point in time, Shawnee County had had two women, Kay McFarland, who had then gone on to the Kansas Supreme Court, and she had moved to the Supreme Court before I began to practice. And then Judge Mary Schoengert, who had been the probate judge in Shawnee County for many, many years. And she was still on the bench when I started practice, and for several years after that. But between the time I started practice and when I applied for the bench, Judge Schoengert became ill and had passed away and left the bench. So there were no women on the bench, and there were very few women anywhere in Kansas on the bench. And so these people approached me and said that they felt that the bench needed to reflect the face of the community, and that we needed women there to represent just that diversity. And that caused me to begin to think, and they obviously felt by approaching me that I was someone that might have a chance of getting on, so that was a good encouragement to even think about it. And I talked to at that point I was a partner in the firm, and I talked to my partners about it, and they were incredibly supportive. I don't think it was a matter that they wanted to get rid of me. In fact, they all kind of said, well, we'd like for you to stay, but we think you would do a good job. We think you have a chance, and we will support you in that if you want to do it. And one of them said to me that, you know, these things happen by just a combination of coincidences of an opening being at the right time when you're able to do it, and you know, all the forces come together. And I think the way he said it was, often the train only comes through the station one time when you're ready to get on. And so if this was the one time, then you should jump on and go for it. And so anyway, with all of that encouragement, I began to think about it, and I was very unsure of doing it because I had not had very much criminal work at all. I had done some criminal work, but it was mostly ghostwriting briefs for other attorneys. I didn't really know the practical ins and outs of a criminal courtroom, and so that put me off. It made me think that maybe I wasn't the best person to do it. But on the other hand, in terms of civil experience, I felt like I did have the very wide-ranging background in civil and was prepared for that. So anyway, after weighing the pros and cons and the thoughts of giving up something I love doing, the idea of being a representative of women resonated with me, and I thought I did want to be there. I wanted to be that person that other people could look to and say, women can be judges. I had always, from the day that I'd been approached about being a district court, kind of my first reaction was, well, if I was ever going to be a judge, I think I'd rather be an appellate judge than a trial judge. So to me, that seemed easier for me to see myself in that role than as a trial judge. But as it turned out, I enjoyed being a trial judge, and so when I had to make the decision about transitioning, I knew that the life was very different. Instead of having those stacks of large numbers of cases to deal with every day, there was less, there were fewer cases, fewer attorneys that appeared in front of you. You didn't have all of the give and take with the community being in your courtroom as jurors, as witnesses. You didn't see the attorneys on a day-to-day basis and that type of thing. And that I felt like that would be a big loss to me. And so once it happened, when I applied to the Supreme Court, there were 3 retirements in just a very short period of time. And then as it happened, without knowing that it would happen, there was yet a 4th of the sitting justices who, although he was on the court when I was sworn in, I never sat with because of a health issue for him. And so he soon retired. So again, that kind of concept of the train's at the station, are you going to get on? It just seemed the opportune time that if I was ever going to think about an appellate bench, that when there were those 3 openings because of a retirement, it only made sense to do it. The best part, I think, is having the opportunity to try again to make a difference in terms of the law. Not necessarily, I don't want to make it sound like I'm out there trying to change things or change the law, but to do whatever I can to hopefully clarify the law or to make it easier to apply for other judges. And I think, having been on the district court bench, that I often think of the judges as I write an opinion, and I try to think, how can I structure this opinion so that if in the heat of a trial, when they only have a few seconds, they can grab that opinion and be able to march through the things they need to be thinking about in the trial. And so I hope that one of the best things is being able to do that and to help my colleagues around the state in that way. The hardest part is that you are often the last voice, and not you individually, but as a court, we are the last voice on a case, and the pressure of that is incredible. Where at a trial court, it's not that you're ever cavalier about a decision, but you do know there's going to be a review process, and that gives you some sense that somebody else is going to be looking at this and making sure it was done correctly. And you don't have that same sense with this court, because very few of our cases are reviewed by a higher court that might be able to change something that But at the same time, that many, many, many people are going to be looking at it and critiquing it. And the scary part of that is that we do handle things, that all types of topics, all sorts of issues that we may not have ever dealt with or know anything about. And so you have this fear that even though you're fairly comfortable that you've done all the work you can to understand the one case that's before you, that something that you say or do in that case will do collateral damage to the whole area of the law because you just don't understand the potential ramifications of what you're doing. I feel that most citizens have no concept of what judges do and how the system works. I think they have a very biased, or not biased isn't the word I want, but a very skewed view. And I think they think that judges kind of create their own issues or create their own arguments, and at times even reach out to create a case, none of which is true, of course, and we just have to deal with what people bring to us. And I think also that they don't understand what I feel is the respect or the guardianship that we have for what the other branches of government do. And I don't think those branches of government necessarily understand how that balance works. Again, it's not that we're out there trying to rewrite a statute or to create something. We try to stay with, if they've written the statute in this way, that's the law and that's what we follow. I think people do not understand necessarily the role of the court in doing those kinds of things. And I also don't think that people really understand how the deliberation process occurs when you have a group of 7 contemplating an issue or discussing an issue. Few of us ever have an opportunity to work in an environment where it is a team that does everything. You may have a team that's involved in some planning or, holding this meeting or doing that kind of thing. But it's very different when you have a group that is involved in the entire process of the entire decision-making process. It's the benefit of an appellate court because you bring together multiple minds to an issue. But it's the potential ramifications of what you're doing. So.